you guys face such incredible circumstances, you have such huge adversity, such small windows of precision in which you must operate. We talked to Butch about training for that. We talked a little bit about the perfection that you guys demand as naval aviators, and really how you dealt with that pressure. Obviously, you've already gave us a little hint with that with your humor, but let us know how you guys got to the level of excellence where you're able to execute in those small parameters.
Well, landing on a boat is so landing on a runway, it's stationary. It's not moving. Landing on a boat, that sucker is moving up, down, and away from you, and on an average of about 25 knots is how much wind you want over the deck. And if there's seas, then that thing's moving up and down like this. So the only way you're going to be able to have your tail hook actually catch a wire, and that landing field between the first and fourth wire is about 120 to 150 feet.
Wow.
The distance. So most runways like your airliners land on, 7,000 feet, 8,000 feet long. This is 150 feet.
Wow.
So you have to essentially put your head through about a 14-inch box in order at the correct airspeed where you're cocked up like this so that your hook is dangling down to catch the wire. And so you have to put your head through a 14-inch box that is also moving like this every time the ship moves. So the only way you do that is you fly the best instrument approach you can on your needles, which is basically a precision approach path that gives you your azimuth and your glide path. So you're constantly making thousands of little corrections like this, all the way down for airspeed, angle of attack, and glide path. And as you're doing that, you're also, when you get in close, you've got some of your buddies on the back of the ship on a radio. They're called landing signals officers. And then they're the last thing that happens. Your last 18 seconds from when you make your ball call, where you call and say, I see the ball, I see the ship, and I'm continuing. And you tell them how much fuel you have. At that point, you are under their control. They take over, and they call you in. And they'll give you little power, or the inflection and what they say is exactly what you do. You obey them exactly. So if they say power, you give them a little bit of power. If they say power, a little more power. If they say power, then you give them a lot of power. And same thing with lineup. If they say right for lineup, you give them a little right dip. Come left, a little left. And so you're betting your life on them making the correct call, because what they can see that you can't see as you're approaching is they see the rear of that ship, the stern of the ship as it moves up and down, and they can tell whether you're going to clear it or not. Because you might think that you can clear it, but what they see is you're at the bottom of a trough. And then now the ship's about to come up a wave, and it's going to come up into you, and they'll give you that call to help you not hit the back end of the ship and become a smoking hole and thousands of pieces of shrapnel scattering across the flight deck, going through hundreds of sailors. So it's a matter of trust and precision. And I have never in my life, I've never done anything. Most pilots are ADD, and you see right now, just as I can't finish the sentence, move to the next. I'm rather hyper. But what happens is there are very few times in your life where you're completely, absolutely focused on one thing. And the only times in my life I've ever been 100% dialed in, focused, is right down the last few seconds in a dive bombing run, right before I pickle a bomb on a target, and I'm sweetening up. That's about one of them. The other two times is landing on the boat during the day, and the pinnacle is landing on the ship at night. Wow. Hands down the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the only thing that every day that I knew I was on the schedule, I'd be a little nervous all day long, and I would not be sure I was going to be able to do it. And then when you trap at night, you catch that wire and it stops. My knees would shake, like just shake. And I'd taxi over and try to stop, and I'd try to stand up, and sometimes it was hard to stand up just because you were that weak in the knees.
Landing wild. What does it take for you mentioned practice runs. So you're doing that to prepare.
Correct, yeah.
And you're on the schedule for a night landing. What would it take to cancel that? Because I assume you would want to, even in the worst of weather, you would still want to have that experience, right? So does that ever get, do they ever say, you know what, it's just too bad?
Well, I've had a close call with that a couple times where Yeah, we would have minimums in training, like the sea state couldn't be more than this, or the ceiling had to be at least the aircraft carrier. By the way, the flight deck's 60 feet off the water, so if your ceiling is just 200 feet,
Wow.
you have about 140 feet from when you break out of the bottom cloud.
Wow.
You have about 140 feet before you slam onto
Going
the
how
deck.
fast?
About 135, 140 knots, which is about 150 miles an hour. So you've only got a second or two to see the carrier before you hit it. But if you're all the way out at sea in the middle of the Atlantic, and we call that doing blue water operations, you don't have anywhere else to go. So your minimums are literally zero. You're going to continue and try to land on that ship, even if you don't see it. And at that point, the guy in the back, the LSO, will do what's called paddles contact. He can see you in his infrared camera even before you can see him. And he'll say paddles contact, which means I see you, keep it coming.
Wow.
And so you're flying just these little needles, keeping it coming, and you can sense the aircraft carrier rising up to meet you, but you don't see it yet. And it's the scariest thing in the world. And then he just keeps it coming. Now you're just totally betting your life on what he says. Come left, little power. And you're doing exactly what he says. And before you know it, maybe you break out with a second or two to spare. You slam into the wire. And it was the coolest thing you've ever done. And I couldn't sleep for hours. It didn't matter if it was 2 a.m. I'd get in my rack. Bing! I mean, I was wide awake, man. It was awesome.
Man, that's incredible. And that's Jim, that's a great point. Think about it. When you left out, it was fine.
Yeah.
Maybe, and then you're coming back in is when you've got to land. And as I hear you tell stories, the precision of coming in to the back of that ship at night, trusting the people around you, trusting the systems around you to bring that plane safely to the deck.